Welcome, everyone. We're so excited you could join us today for the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program's event, Modernizing Workplace Benefits to Support Financial Resilience. This event is part of our Benefits21 initiative, which envisions a future where all workers and their families have access to and achieve equitable outcomes from our system of public and private benefits. My name is Sarika Abbey, and I lead our Benefits21 initiative. Our event today is supported by our funders of Benefits21, which include JP Morgan Chase, Lafayette Square, MetLife Foundation, Prudential Financial, and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Today's conversation is part 2 of a series of conversations we've been having exploring the role of benefits in supporting workers and their families to be financially resilient. We're looking at both what benefits are critical for financial resiliency and how we need to modernize them to ensure better outcomes for households. Part 1 of this series is on our website and explored the role of public benefits. We're really excited about today's conversation, which is going to be exploring the role of workplace benefits. And we're excited about our panelists of private sector leaders who are going to be talking both about which workplace benefits are critical to financial resiliency and how do we improve our benefits in those systems to better support households and their families. It's really important for us to be talking about this today because we find ourselves in an urgent moment with lots of uncertainty in our world. Not only did we experience this in the pandemic with a large economic and health shock, but we're seeing it in the devastating impact of climate change with extreme floods and fires. And we're also seeing it in the uncertainty of our economic environment, with today's conditions of high inflation, making it incredibly challenging for families to make ends meet. And coupled with this precarity of our world, we have to recognize that we have a diverse profile of workers whose needs we need to meet. This includes full-time workers, part-time workers, contingent workers, and workers with multiple jobs in multiple work arrangements. So we owe it to this entire range of workers to figure out how do we modernize our benefits, improving their design, their delivery, and how they interact with each other to ensure the real possibility of financial resiliency for all of these workers in an increasingly unpredictable world. Before I pass it off to our panel, and we get the opportunity to really dig into this rich conversation, I wanted to let you know that we'll be on social media at Aspen FSP, and you could join the conversation at hashtag Aspen FSP Live. If you have any questions or comments during today's conversation, please go ahead and use the chat. And if you have any resources to share with us as we're on this learning journey, we welcome those as well. I now want to turn it to my colleague and our managing director, Joanna Smith-Ramani, who's going to be moderating our panel today.
Hi, thank you so much, Sarika, and welcome to everyone joining today. And I'd love to call my panelists to the screen. So if you could turn on your video and unmute yourself and join us. As they do that, I'll introduce them to everyone. We have Mike Estep. He's the head of product for group insurance at Prudential, a business unit at Prudential Financial that produces and distributes a full range of group, life, disability, voluntary, and corporate and trust-owned life insurance. My goodness, Mike, you must be faster than I am in introducing yourself. But it's super.
I just say how to product and cut it. So that's
yep, there you go. He's had a product, period.
Yeah.
Don Baylor is the managing director and the co-head of community impact at Lafayette Square. And Sarah Enright is a director at BSR, where she designs and facilitates private sector collaborations for sustainable development. So what a cool panel we have today to discuss the real meaty issues that Sarika put on the table. I'm just going to open it. Sarika kind of left us with this sense of urgency, like there is a moment now that we at FSP feel pressure around to do something big and to do something bold with these issues. And I'm wondering if you share that same sense of urgency, and if you could be sort of precise about why for you in the role you have, there is this sense of urgency around benefits and the connection to financial resilience. Sarah, let me go ahead and invite you to kind of share your thoughts on this.
Sure, and thank you. And thank you so much for having us here today. BSR, we've been raising awareness of the impacts of economic inequality on business and society since our founding in the 1990s. If you recall, going into the pandemic, we were in a deep inequality crisis. Right. During the pandemic, I think we caught a glimpse of how things could be run differently. And we feel that this is a moment to capture the learnings that we had during the pandemic of rapidly creating a social safety net that did help the country to get through that crisis moment, to encourage the next generation of business leaders and policymakers to adapt what is truly an outdated set of benefits and social safety net systems. We saw the government during the pandemic rise with stimulus payments, supplemental unemployment insurance, unemployment benefits, and sick leave for independent contractors, which was a really big deal. Yeah. Additional pay for essential workers, and these are they created a true safety net where we didn't have one before. And unfortunately, we're seeing many of those safety net policies being rolled back now. They were intentionally temporary, and they're now being revoked now that the crisis is is seen to have been passed. And I think worryingly also, we're seeing that companies that stepped up during the pandemic to make major commitments like increasing the time for maternity leave or sick leave are rolling back some of those commitments now that they also are seeing the crisis to have passed. So just as an example, the Society for Human Resources Management finds that now 35% of employers are offering paid maternity leave beyond what was required by law, and that's down from 53% in 2020. Wow. So we really are seeing a major step back that, we're at this moment of choice. Do we want to go back to where we were at 2020, or do we want to advance with the learnings that we've made? Our message and hope for business leaders is that they see that they've begun to see their benefit offerings as an underutilized opportunity to support their workers' financial security and to largely address income and wealth inequality in the United States. It is a business strategy that can be used for business and social benefit.
When we get to this conversation further on around measuring impact, be interesting to see, the companies that offered things and pulled it back. I suspect it's because they weren't actually measuring impact to see how good those additional benefits were. But let's pin that, because I'm really interested in the change back. Don, let me hear from your perspective. Like, where do you feel urgency? Does it align with Sarah's? Are there particular classes of benefits that you feel urgent about, from your perspective as investor and sort of solutions provider?
Yeah, certainly. I would certainly piggyback on Sarah's kind of run through the various government programs that have been either scaled back or completely eliminated. We are going to see that impact debt. We are going to see that impact credit, and we are going to see that impact financial health. Combined with an economy that is, beginning to shed jobs in a way that we had not over the past several months. There's going to be belt tightening all the way around. But specifically, I think one of the things that we're most urgent about is the full-time working uninsured. When we Worker Solutions, which is a platform built by Lafayette Square, when we start to look at go underneath the hood and ask the question, who is participating in the health plan, and disaggregate that data, we're seeing larger and larger gaps with regard to who is insured based upon what position you hold within the company. So we see 4-to-1, 5-to-1 gaps, which are actually much larger than federal data might suggest.
Wow. Okay, well, that I know we want to dig into as we get sort of from this high level, like painting a picture of why this matters, into some very specific examples, because the goal of this call and my invitation to everyone listening is not to feel so overwhelmed that we are putting our head in the sand, but actually to be inspired by where we think there are solutions and next steps and real things to do, that we all can take a piece of the change. So I know that's the goal of the three people on this call. It's certainly our goal at FSP is to get more leadership activated. And I suspect everyone who's listening in has a thing that they can do in their own sphere. So turning it over to you, Mike, you're our only kind of direct benefit provider. You guys build, develop them. If I just stopped at product even, I would have sufficiently described the role you play. Where does the insurance world feel urgency about this, or what's the perspective from that side? And you have quite a depth of experience over time, in the benefits space.
Yeah, I certainly think access has been used a couple of times, but I think access to benefits, as well as going after underserved markets, is a place where the insurance industry as a whole needs to do better.
Okay.
For me, fundamentally, though, you can create access, and some of the proliferation of technology tools is allowing additional products to be offered on a broader setting to the workplace. What's lacking, though, is decision guidance and education around the roles that those products play. Oftentimes we see people not purchasing products that may help them in times of need because they simply don't understand them. And while technology has made it easier to create a menu of products to be available, I've seen the fact that kind of the old style face-to-face, feet-to-feet education has started to wane, and the reliance on technology to educate employees on the benefits and how they fit their needs is lacking. So as an industry, for Prudential, as a industry, insurance industry of group benefits, that's a good part of where our focus is on how do we educate people on those benefits.
Yeah, so it feels like, tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but what I'm hearing you say, which connects a bit to what Don was bringing into the conversation, is that there is just a basic urgency, not even around what are all the new products to be developed, but the like actually taking advantage of what is in the world and how you would use them, and why, like, really, what's the value for me as employee? Why do I want this? Why would I use it? How do I get that it's part of my compensation package? Right. Fascinating. So keeping us at this sort of higher level for a few more minutes before we get into like the rolling up our jackets and whatever to do something about it. Sarah, I'm curious from your perspective, given the places of urgency we've uncovered, you brought up, there's an urgency that we actually had more benefits for like 18 months, and now we're flowing back in ways that are not actually helping America's workers. Don and Mike are talking about sort of different kinds of benefits and how people are not accessing them in the way that they could be if they use them, and that maybe there's not the right value there for them. You also mentioned, Sarah, interestingly, where benefits can fit into strategy for business. I'm just wondering, like, who are the kinds of leaders that can actually lead this change? Like, what roles do you see when you were trying to figure out in your week, who does Sarah spend time talking to? Like, who is it? I'm so curious. And what are you trying to get them to do?
I think it's actually really central to the challenge of this topic is that there are many owners within organizations and policymaking that touch on benefits and social safety nets, and therefore no one decision maker. Okay. That makes, I think that extra complexity makes it difficult for us to design more comprehensive, effective, impactful benefit systems. So just from a corporate example, which is where we spent most of our time, certainly compensation professionals and human resources are in charge of selecting benefits plans. But you also see that the topic of benefit innovation and social safety net may be owned by other parts of the organization, their philanthropic branch or their corporate social responsibility team. You see that policy advocacy on social safety nets that are provided by state and national government are really led by corporate affairs individuals. And frankly, I don't think benefits are on the radar of most strategy teams, and certainly not top of mind for C-suite. When we've talked about when we talk about economic security to business leaders, we've often led with the message of living wages, which in the United States doesn't typically include a consideration for benefits. It's not it's not part of the holistic package when we think about living wages in the U.S. And I think it needs to be. It needs to be added in there as part of the full package of opportunity that a company is able to offer to its employees, and it needs to be looked at through the same lenses as business strategy, with the same level of innovation and as a company might employ with any employee engagement and training and development opportunity.
Do you see movement towards that? Like, do you feel like when you can really get to the right triangulation of people, I won't say a person, because as you described, it's sort of right, it's no different than trying to make change a little bit in public benefits and public supports and all the different committees they sit on and all the different streams of funding and there's state and there's federal, right? It's as complex as it is in someone's life, it's equally complex, or a different kind of complexity in terms of changing the system, it seems. Do you feel like there's progress being made around that?
I think there is a movement happening, and especially as employees came back from the pandemic demanding increased wages, companies have started to look at their benefits packages again as a competitive differentiator, and as part of the whole value of employment. We'd love to see that innovation continue and to kind of take advantage of that wave of interest to make these changes permanent.
Don, how does that resonate what Sarah's saying about who do you need to talk to and how do you make it of value to the employer to make benefits of value to their employees? Because, that is a big part of your theory of change at Lafayette Square, is actually changing the culture and purpose in some ways of benefits for the employer, for the institution.
Yeah, so we believe that it really investors have a huge opportunity, and we believe an obligation within their portfolio companies to make sure that particularly low and moderate income folks, who are the ones that are not attached to these benefits in the same way, but what gets measured gets done. At Lafayette Square and Worker Solutions, this is something that people are responsible for changing, right? Is the uptake of benefits by our employees, particularly our LMI employees, of these core benefits, but also improving their overall well-being. And so I think if investors, particularly in private equity and private credit and other fund managers, really begin to think about how attention to this type of detail can play a role with regard to risk management, as well as returns, we believe that everyone will be better off, that it's a win-win for everyone. And so providing incentives and resources to your portfolio companies to really assist them, because it is true, what many people said so far today is that the benefits currently speaking that were designed largely in the 1970s and 1980s do not meet the needs and are not designed for the workforce that we have today. So this modernization issue, this retrofit issue, however you want to call it, is really critical, but you have to get your hand dirty with this work.
Mike, do you get the sense, I'm just thinking about how, most of today's workers are working in a benefit system that was not designed for them. Especially if you look at women workers for whom none of this stuff was designed to having this many women in the workforce, personal issue. But I'm actually wondering, do you feel like employers are frustrated or understand how there's a lack of congruency between what they're offering and what families, workers need?
I think it's even beyond that, right? Like, to be honest with you, I think it does vary by sophistication of case size. When we look at it in the past, when you get to employers with, say, sub 100, sub 200, typically where the CEO or the CFO or even an HR manager who's doing the role of 20 different people, there's a lot of misinformation around how to structure effective benefits packages. remember getting feedback, direct feedback by numerous during a focus groups that we were doing, and was told, well, I can't offer voluntary benefits because I'm not paying for those. And those would not be, that's not right for an employer. Hold on. Like that actually allowing access to benefits.
Right.
You're doing by not allowing access to benefits, you're doing your employee population a disservice. So I think before you even get to that, like the sophistication of the benefits packages that are being designed and the kind of the bread and butter of the small companies that fuel our country, there's an enormous gap. I think, once you get into Fortune 500, you have benefits. It's much more sophisticated. Sure, there's gaps with the modern working dynamic with more women in the workforce and mental health, but they have the resources to at least put together a thoughtful consultative benefits package that doesn't exist in the smaller end.
Yeah, that's really interesting about the segmentation of kinds of employers. Not to stick on this too long, but Don, you guys do that. Like, you very much focus on a certain size kind of employer, I think partly for this reason. And I'm wondering what your sense is, or if you would add any nuance to what Mike just shared.
No, it definitely, resonates with us because, in our interactions, we tend to focus on the middle market, right, which has about 300,000 companies, 50 million workers, many of whom are low and moderate income, completely geographically dispersed all around the country. We see a couple of things. One is we see that this benefits gap is much, much larger in this segment. But we also see that HR capacity, to Mike's point, is not as robust as you're going to find in the Fortune 1000 companies. And so there really is an acute need in that middle market, where we see, extremely high need, but also relatively low capacity on HR to both analyze the data, understand what the issues are, but then also to think about what are the right solutions for my diverse set of workers.
And when you say gap, just to clarify, Don, do you mean gap in usage or gap in kinds of benefits offered, or both?
Certainly both. So we talked about the difference in uptake, the dramatic difference in uptake. We also believe that there are some benefits like matched liquid savings that should be much more prevalent in workforces to go along with your typical retirement plan.
Yeah. Well, so that leads me to my next question that I'm curious what you guys think about. We've been sort of talking about benefits as this like big collective amorphous set of things, but let's talk about some specific ones. They all interact in ways that have to be almost like a super vitamin. One will not solve a financial resiliency problem. They need to make like a really delicious cocktail to work well all together for workers. But I'm curious, Sarah, like what would you call financial resiliency benefits? What are the core ones that when you're working with business leaders, you try to make sure they get are the 2022, core things that need to be offered?
No, it's true. It's, not all benefits are the same. And I was reviewing once, the benefits that are offered by some tech companies, and I came across pet insurance, and I didn't even like, what is that? So I had to look that up. Yeah, pet insurance, that's a wonderful perk, but it's not the core of what we're talking about here.
Wouldn't consider that in like the essential, like
the essential basket.
Few sense of things we need. Yeah.
Maybe someday when I'm not working for a nonprofit, I can benefit from that. But no, I think we really zoom in, because we're looking at financial security and equity as our kind of central focus on this topic. So we're looking at those benefits that offer a true safety net on basic needs, and those that help build long-term wealth and financial resilience for workers. So I think actually we're very aligned with the framework that you all used in your scorecard that came out recently, to look at how effective and are these in building long-term financial resilience for workers, and zeroing in on those. So certainly healthcare insurance, paid sick leave, family leave, increasingly caregiver support, to your point about working mothers, retirement savings. These are the kind of essential basket. And I'm sure there are others, but these are kind of been the focus for our work.
Mike, are there others that you see from your perspective doesn't have to be like what Prudential's basket is, but just in the world of insurance?
I do think it's personal depending on the situation. I do think there might be someone who doesn't have kids and the pet is their child, and and maybe they can't afford to that vet visit, that it does make sense. But if you had to look at them all and prioritize them, probably not the top. Given the enormous multi-trillion, I think I read it was like $14 trillion gap in life insurance across the United States, whether that's not having life insurance or not having enough life insurance, that's just fundamental for stability within the family. And that goes back decades upon decades. I think it comes back to also, when we look at why people don't purchase, it comes back to, I don't know how much I need. I don't understand it. So it goes to the education component that we might get into a little bit more later. But obviously disability and some of the paid family leave plans that are emerging in states across the country are critical for stability, consistency, and getting productively back to work. So I would say life and disability, and for some, not to throw out our entire product portfolio here, but I do think the rise in accident coverages like accident and critical illness for those who are now find themselves in a high deductible health plan with a deductible that is beyond anything that they could fathom to afford. Having some of those products can make or break families as if they get sick or if they get injured. Having that to cover the gap is hugely beneficial.
That's interesting. That begs the question of are we coming up with more products to band-aid products that maybe aren't the most effective for families or not? I don't know, honestly. I'm most certainly not an insurance expert, but it just make me think, what are we trying to do to get around other kinds of, if a core health insurance product, because I think everyone's probably going to, I know Don will say, I'm going to speak for Don, that health insurance is core and central. If it was sufficiently done, what else might you not need? I don't know. A question for us all to ponder. I don't know if you have a quick answer, Mike, because I was going to ask Don, because they do deep work to understand the benefits of companies and what workers need. And I'm wondering what else might have come out of that research, but anything on the insurance else on it, Mike?
If you could solve for that, you'd be, it's like solving world hunger. I don't know. I mean, medical insurance, the cost of medical insurance, not only for the nation, for us personally, continues to go up, and for the employers. And I think, that is something, while it needs to be addressed, I do think it creates gaps. It's one where that there's not an easy answer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm being a little tongue in cheek there, but pointing out what you're saying, which is that one of the most important ones is one of the ones that we really need to put a lot of energy into leadership into figuring out, because it so deeply impacts other parts of what other benefits you need and your own financial security and resilience. Don, based on the way you guys approach a company and getting to know them and what their workers say they need and what they have, are there other benefits you throw into the mix here? We've got a pretty good mix, but let me let you weigh in.
Certainly. So, certainly this issue of lack of liquidity is something that we see and hear all the time, right? So wherever there is a relatively large LMI workforce, we always hear, we get requests for salary advances on a periodic basis, right? That is a ongoing theme. And so having some type of liquidity answer for folks, whether or not that is an emergency relief fund that you set up, whether or not that is some type of 0% small dollar loan, which is something that we have on our platform, in addition potentially to having some type of matched liquid or emergency savings product or solution. The other thing I think, we've been very, very clear that, although we're not going to have a lot of impact on wages, we want to create as much budget space for workers as we can. And so I think another example of a benefit that needs modernization or a hack is our FSA family of programs, right, which rely on workers to actually pre-outlay prior to spend in many cases. And so there are some solutions that really kind of smooth out that process, that really enable folks to keep more of their pre-tax money, because a lot of LMI workers are essentially getting taxed twice for medical and dependent care expenses.
Mike, I want to go back to your kind of one of the original urgent problems you brought up. So if we have this core that we've all talked about, I would attempt to list it, but I'll leave out one of the many thoughtful things that you all said. But you know, this interaction of all the kinds of benefits we discussed, this need for the underutilization is partly caused, or at least your hypothesis based on all your work, because people don't have the kind of like professional, you know, like almost like financial coaching, right? Like financial planning for your benefits, to know really how to curate the set that they need for their families and for their lives. Am I saying that wrong? Am I misspeaking what you're saying? Or what is your sense of how that fits into the challenges that we're solving for here?
Yeah, no, you stated that correctly. It's really, open enrollment. It's that time of year. It's very, it's November. Most companies, I think 65 to 75% of employers go through open enrollment in November.
You're
so it's
getting
very
emails
timely.
every day reminding us to not forget to do all the things, which I greatly appreciate from our HR so that we don't forget.
Right. And typically today, like because of the proliferation of technology, you'll get a link and you'll go on to your benefits administrative platform and you'll get a list of products that are being offered and you have a choice. And that choice is to click what you want. But there is zero education, right? And there is an emergence of decision guidance tools, both that are digital in nature or even humans, like there are companies like Prudential is one, and others that are investing in point of enrollment education for employees. So that could be a video one-on-one. It could be tools that have AI and machine learning kind of embedded in them that help consult people at the time of enrollment to make decisions. You're left with either Googling it yourself, talking to your spouse. But I think we really do have a fiduciary responsibility if we're distributing these products to help educate people on what's being offered. I did notice in the Q&A that there was a question around, is it that or is it affordability? And I think it's a combination of the two. I think, one of the things that we need to get to is to where we can have products that cover the various needs of demographic profiles, right? Like you may not need a critical illness product with 33 covered illnesses within it. Let's pick the top 5 or 6 where people that are the most common and make it a little bit more affordable. That's part of the way that they're distributed, where the employer picks what they're going to offer, and then that's it. So there's not a lot of personalization and choice at the employee level. That's going to take infrastructure and technology in order to enable that level of choice, but it's a direction that we need to go in as an industry.
Do you think, Mike, who needs to do that in like investment? Is that on the benefit provider side? Is it on the broker side? Is it employers understanding their workforce better? Like, how do we get to customization and more personalization?
It's kind of Sarah's answer to the other question. It's a little bit of everybody, right? Like we all play a role.
And I want it to be one person. I want to call.
There really isn't
I'm
one
joking.
person, right? And quite frankly, it starts with the carrier partnering with the broker and making that education component of the sale, not just the price, the education component of the sale, a part of the benefit strategy. And then also making sure that the employer, and you can do that, but if the employer isn't bought in to an education and communication strategy, it usually doesn't play out that well. Right. And so it really takes that triangle of carrier, employer, and broker to put together a thoughtful communication and engagement strategy based upon the needs of their employee population. Some employees, it's better, because of the location disparity, or because of the age. There's different methods that work better for different employees. So you have to be thoughtful and be upfront about it.
Don, do you find that this sort of method that you all have of going, when you are getting to know a business and employer and you're helping them really get to know their employees in this other way, this way around their benefits needs, that Like, how does that fit into this conversation of challenges being that both are affordability challenges and usage and uptake challenges, just around not just even having like the right big name benefit, but I think what Mike is describing is variation within that. Like, I may not need a Cadillac version of every single benefit. What do you hear about that? Is that, I'm just so curious because you guys have such an active engagement with the employer and with understanding the workforce that they uniquely have, like their particular employee base.
Yeah, and so this, I mean, for us, this is where data and assessment is really, really important. Before you can actually prescribe, you have to diagnose. And so for us, that is the first and most important step is get to know the company, the industry that they're in, the areas where their employees live, whether or not it's largely a deskless or a desk workforce. And so all of these factors really kind of go into determining, what is the right fit, and it may not be the right fit for everyone in that workforce. And so there is a certain amount of segmentation that can happen that can be important with regard to rolling out a new solution. But it's also thinking about how do you improve the core benefits that you currently have. And it may not be about changing providers. It could just be about communication. It could be about potentially additional subsidies. So there are lots of different ways to improve on that front as well.
Sarah, you mentioned, and thank you for plugging our 2022 benefits scorecard framework. And hopefully someone will throw, if they didn't when Sarah spoke before, we'll throw a link in there. My colleague Raquan or Sarika will. But we put together a scorecard, as Don was saying, as a way to essentially assess like the value of these benefits to workers using a frame of financial resiliency and financial security. And Don has mentioned data. I'm curious in your conversations with business leaders, where data really, I think what people are mostly measuring, and tell me if I'm wrong, is, and if they're measuring something, is essentially like uptake. Like, I have X amount of people in a retirement account, not I know that they are saving sufficiently for their retirement, or I know the segmented differences between by race and by gender, right? So how do you think this sort of more rigorous way of assessing benefits and their impact fits into bringing, employers and business leaders along? Like, do they want to know the answers to these things?
That's an interesting question. I think any well-meaning human resources professional, when awareness is raised that their most vulnerable workers are not receiving any of the benefits that they're offering, cares. So I'm optimistic on this topic.
Good. I was like, please answer that in a way that doesn't make me cry.
I think, however, that you're right, that the majority of kind of KPIs on benefits from what we've seen are utilization rates, and they don't dig further. Many companies don't dig further to see what kinds of workers are utilizing these benefits. Are we reaching our frontline and low-income workers? Are we reaching, the certain locations? Are we analyzing that data in a way to see whether utilization is universal? And then are they actually meeting the needs of the individuals that we're trying to serve? Yeah. So we're trying to ask companies to not add a whole bunch of new things so much as dig in a little deeper into what you're currently offering to make sure that it is in fact serving your employees and in the way that they need to be served. Seeking worker feedback, getting a little bit deeper on what workers want and whether or not the benefits that you're offering, that suite of benefits is fully serving their needs.
I know that some employers, there are a few, and they're probably in sort of like what Mike was talking about, this like top tier in terms of resources capacity, have done additional surveys of their workers to try to figure out kind of a baseline of financial well-being and health, and then, tinker with wages, tinker with benefits, and over time see hopefully how things improve or know where to retinker. Is there enough data? I guess I'm wondering, is that necessary to do like full additional surveys do you think there's untapped data within whatever they're already getting from the benefits usage that's sufficient? I'm just wondering, like, how big a task is this? How templated could it be? And really, I'm asking anyone here what you think about that.
I'll just sorry to speak twice, but I'll just give a quick example from my own organization. I recently found that one of my career managees, a young woman who started with BSR a year ago, hadn't signed up for, just in a casual conversation, hadn't signed up for our 401k plan. And to me, that's something that from the very beginning of somebody's employment, you should ask them directly, will you sign up, right? Like, person to person, not just an email, not just to click the link. Person
like, I am looking you in the eye and saying, are you going to sign up for your 401k?
Right. That should be actively encouraged.
Yeah. Don, I mean, you guys do a difference. You do a layer over, but then you do quite a bit of data analysis. And is that existing data in the, like, what already is standard and what they get about the benefits? And by they, I'm sorry, I mean the employer and the HR departments? Or is there more data we need to collect to really understand if we look at our scorecard, like what is the real outcome and value of that benefit for the worker?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's, we believe that worker voice is extremely important, and not just for benefits. It would seem to me, if you are spending that amount of money, you would want to know what your end users actually think about those products. So it just, on a very, very basic level, it would seem to be that would be one of your kind of key data points in terms of what's missing from our benefits selection, but also what could be made better with our existing ones. So that is certainly something that we actually help middle market companies with, is eliciting and designing surveys to really capture that employee voice, and then to use that as a data input to decide or to think about what solutions actually could be relevant for this particular population given their responses.
And we're about to go, thank you. And we're about to go to question and answer, but Mike, I'm really curious from your perspective, especially with a suite of benefits, some of which can give you kind of immediate right now fulfillment. Like if you need short-term disability, like right now, how that's helping you, but also benefits that are really about planfulness around life insurance and other things. How do you feel like this measurement of value and outcome conversation fits into those kinds of benefits, or how do you just think about that generally?
I think we have a long way to go, because I think it's a similar issue as I articulated on the front end with education. If you get people to educated and people purchase, I'd say the average American doesn't understand what they actually purchase and how to use it, right? So, and I don't give an example for our own benefits. Some of my members of my team are new, and we were texting each other the dental card the other day because I couldn't find it, right? Like how, like these are people that work for an insurance card that can't find their dental card anywhere, right? And and this is for Prudential, this is a big company. So I think investments in the experience is what's important. It's somewhat cliche with people talking about the Amazon experience and raising the bar, but it's true. We haven't always been easy to do business with, go figure, as the insurance industry, but it's also there's not a lot of tangibility to insurance and what you got and how to use it, and what it's for. And I think, that's areas that we're investing as a company. And I know other members of the other carriers within the insurance business are as well. But to drive up that utilization, that's the point. You want to drive utilization, but you got to make sure people understand what they are and how to use them.
I wish I had my notebook out. I have my notes just for this call, but when you and I were prepping, you said something along the lines of like, people should feel like the benefits are theirs, like identify with these benefits as their own. And to me, that actually is like really provocative. I've worked for X amount of decades, and I still feel like my benefits are my employers and they're not mine and my own. Even though that's part of my compensation, it's actually how my family survives and thrives, is because I have benefits. But I think that's sort of what you're saying here too. Like we actually have not spent a lot of time on the experience and the way people feel about these. Anyhow, it was an interesting comment you made, and I thought sort of thematically something we all should be thinking about, like how do people feel like these are theirs for them? There is value in them for their families and their households. All right, I'm going to flip to questions because these questions are really good and they're questions I didn't get to. So I'm really pleased people also asked them. One of the questions folks asked was how, and I'm just looking in my chat to make sure I asked them right. And this maybe I'll start with you first, Sarah, but it was about how this stuff can fit into the S of ESG as a way to incentivize business leaders to pay attention. The metrics in the S are squishy, but is this a way to make it more rigorous? And a related question that I had in my notes was, are there ways for these companies that have made big commitments, public ones or otherwise, around DEI and other values-based commitments, where benefits can actually be part of the strategy for fully realizing what they said they would do? So I don't know if you have thoughts about this, Sarah, and others can chime in too, but this might be, at least I'll start with you because of the work you do in the space you're in.
Sure. And I'll say, we haven't looked at this explicitly through a DEI lens, but there's certainly a connection. The lowest paying jobs, people in the most insecure roles at work typically are of marginalized populations and people of underrepresented ethnicities are in insecure roles. So this disproportionately does, and lack of access to benefits disproportionately does impact vulnerable workers. So I do think that there's a DEI connection and certainly an obligation that companies have to ensure that their frontline, low-income and vulnerable workers and workforces are achieving access to the benefits that they have the rights to access. And I love that lens. It is our right. I would love, actually, I think that it is maybe a component of a company's contribution to the S and ESG. Certainly not, it's the only, but I'd love to see that as part of the package.
Don, in the investor world, do you see where this could be part of the S, or if there's any discussions about how something like this could fit in?
Oh, no, I mean, it fully, we believe that it is, part of the S. I mean, obviously ESG has come under a lot of scrutiny, kind of around the country, either for overstated goals or for political reasons. But certainly what I would call the socioeconomic piece of ESG is, squarely where we're focused on, which is really making a quantitative and an objective difference in workers' lives. And so that's kind of where, we really fit in. And that can include, things around education, things around health, including financial security.
Mike, I'm going to throw this next question at you. There's a couple that relate to small businesses, like small businesses.
Okay.
Is there anything we've talked about that's relevant for them, or is this all just to these ambitions that we have described? Is it just unreasonable at this point to think that small businesses can really evolve this way around modernizing their benefits, given capacity and resource constraints?
I hope not. I hope they can. I think it's a tall order to reach them and to consult them in such a manner. There's emergence of organizations like PEOs that have their pros and cons potentially depending on who you are, but they can offer support in designing benefits packages amongst other things where they may not have the internal resources. But I think it's up to the combination of the broker and the carriers to continue to advise and help fill some of that gaps with respect to acumen and resources to increase access and education, within it. Because I know Sarah mentioned, like, a lot of that is small businesses, right? Like we're across the country, and it's just as important as any Fortune 1000.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's so almost infuriating about all this work that's happening around benefits really being meaningful towards financial security outcomes is that there's still so much occupational segregation in our country about who gets access to anything, let alone the segmentation by business size and what that really means. Like, it can't matter at the end of the day what kind of worker you are, part-time, full-time, contract, or what kind of business you work for, because none of us thrive without wages are insufficient. And so trying to like figure all this out for all these complicated slices, I don't find overwhelming, because we will do it, but it's so necessary and sort of infuriating at the same time that so many people will lag behind others as a result. Sarah, do you guys do much thought on small businesses? And then I'll ask one last question before I get to my last question. I don't actually know the answer, so you could be like, no, Joanna, that's not a good question for me.
Yeah, no, I'd say it's not. It's our focus has really been on large national companies.
Yeah. Okay.
But I just want to add to this bit where I think that what we're talking about still is what companies are currently offering. And I feel like there's the additional effort that is needed to engage with policymakers at a state and national level to ensure that there is a complement of social safety net benefits that are being offered to everybody, not just who happens to be in your four walls. To create a more equitable and fair distribution of benefits to society. And ideally, long term, we move away from a system of safety nets that's dependent on employment with certain employers who are generous enough to offer benefits. I think that that's fundamentally unfair system.
Yeah. Do you, so this was another question that was asked, which relates to what you were just saying, Sarah, where someone was asking, so you just said, and thank you for bringing it up, of the critical role of policymakers around things that can be government supported benefits. Where do you guys have thoughts? And again, this I'll throw out to whoever does, I won't call one of you out, but on what policymakers can do to scale workplace benefits? Like, is there, I'm curious, Mike or Don, are there ways that you see incentives could be made, or there's regulation in certain kinds of benefits that are making it hard? Whatever kind of take on it, if you have thoughts on that.
So I guess I'll go ahead. So one of the things that we have heard and are noticing in the marketplace is a proliferation of fintech related purported financial security results products that are out there in the marketplace. And our sense is that that creates a lot of paralysis, quite honestly, with regard to your well-meaning HR leads that are actually looking to find something to improve financial security for their workers. And so what there is missing from the field, from our perspective, is any kind of vetting certification process that would give HR leaders more confidence as to the safety of that non-predatory nature of those types of products.
Yeah, interesting. So I know you went one step behind saying regulation, which I appreciate, but I understand where you're headed with that it's like a wild, wild west sort of those products. And how would any HR person really know how to sort through that? Mike, what about you? Do you see a role for policymakers around workplace benefits?
I do. I think I think it just starts with education. I wouldn't say a lot of policymakers even are close enough to workplace benefits to know where to put their attention. Oftentimes, it's more on the protection side and making sure that carriers aren't being self-serving in the benefits that they're developing and ultimately placing in front of employees, rather than helping us proliferate, get the products out there, right? Dealing with 50 departments of insurance as an insurance company is a very costly, arduous task, and there's helping to create some uniformity and consistencies around regulations and legislation would be hugely, immensely helpful, because it's a mess, and that's the way it's been. And but getting some consistency
for sure.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm going to ask my final question, but I need to ask, I think, Mike, you and I talked about this in our prep call, And now several people have asked about total compensation statements. So I feel like didn't we talk about this before? And there's a flutter of questions around, does anyone use them? Are they working? Do they help motivate usage and value out of benefits for workers, for employees? So do you have a thought on that briefly? Just because there's so many questions around this and we had talked about it.
I mean, for me, that I would say it's probably for Sarah and Don. I don't see them, right? Like whether or not an employer is pulling out these ancillary benefits and using it. Personally, I have, right? Like I've received a total compensation. Oftentimes I feel like that's because there is a shortage in base salaries, but that's, that's just the personal reaction to this.
We have to make this look bigger than it is. I'm sorry, I thought we had spoken about it. Don, do you have thoughts on do you guys work with employers on this or anything? Or if not, it's interesting that so many people are bringing up
it's not something that we've seen. And I think there is something to the reverse psychology effect that this might actually have on employees when they see it. And I've also seen it be used in a way by state officials to justify low wages, right? Because they can get the EITC, they can get these laundry list of other benefits, and so their real pay is like $60,000, not $20,000. So there's certainly a different
unintended
way
consequence side to it. So we have like 60 seconds because Sarika is going to close us out. Gosh, I thought I'd have like so much time because there was one panel, but then there's like a million more things to ask you guys. And I did prep you on this, so hopefully you have sort of a pithy way to say this, but I would love, because this crowd who's listening wants to do something about this. And I'm wondering if each of you have an offer for our group of active leaders that are in this conversation on what is like a first step to take. Like this is a big, complex problem and we need to make progress towards it. So what would be like the thing you want to offer as a step folks can be taking? And it can be folks just in your field and the things that you do. Don't feel like it has to be broad for everyone. Sarah, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, mine's very tangible. The BSR's Healthy Business Coalition is hosting a conversation in January focused on modernizing benefits for frontline workers. And we'd love for any business representative on the call to join us. We're going to be taking a futures lens at how we can get from where we are today to an ideal future.
That's wonderful. I love that. Mike? Do you have?
I would say my takeaway or my advice would be just to take education and make education, put it front and center, and make it as important as the benefits that are being offered. There's a real gap.
Thank you. And don't lose your dental card.
Because then you have to call a friend to get a text.
Yeah, get to phone a friend. Don, any last words of wisdom before Sarika takes stage?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the policy arena once again. So certainly, whether or not it's additional disclosures about benefits utilization. So I think the more that there is sunlight on the benefits gap, the more I think we can actually spur to action and hold many different stakeholders accountable.
Thank you so much, Don. And Sarah, I see folks asking for a link to that event. So maybe as Sarika wraps us up, you can put it in there and we can certainly share it with folks too. So thank you all so very, very much. I'm going to ask you all to turn off your videos and mute, and we will let Sarika close us out from this fantastic conversation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all so much for such an exciting conversation. I think more than anything, we just are looking forward to digging in, rolling up our sleeves and moving all of this work forward. I want to thank again our panelists, our funders, and all of you for attending and being a part of the conversation. This is really the starting point of the next 2 years of our work at Benefits21 as we work to modernize and strengthen our benefits to support financial resilience of workers and their families. We're going to look both at gaps in specific benefits, but also how we improve our benefit systems, looking at payment of benefits, how benefits are delivered, and how benefits interact with each other to more holistically support the financial resilience of households. Please join our newsletter and reach out, as we know it takes a village, and we want all of us involved to make the impact we need to make for all workers. And we'll have both a publication forthcoming that really lays out the foundation of this work, and we'll be hosting an event in the beginning of next year to keep engaging leaders across sectors to take the actions, many of which were discussed today. Thank you again for your time, and we look forward to connecting with all of you. Take care.